Yeah, hi, thanks for having me. I don't have a manuscript. I try to talk free. Paul was referring to that wherever you go, you do the same talk. I most of the time show pictures from the same projects, but the talk always varies depending what I've heard so far. First of all, I would ask you your apology for maybe sometimes not being able to speak so much because I have a terrible cough. So if I would speak as much as I would like, I would fade after 30 minutes. So in a way, you'll have an orgy of pictures from, I think, 6 or 7 or 8 different projects. And I will try to explain of how I work. I found an enormous similarity in Paul's career and my career, even though we've done very, very different things. But the triggers are quite similar. And this is what I'm finding very, very interesting, because we were both doing, basically, we're the same generation. He studied a bit earlier. I started late. So I started to study photography when I was 27. I did politics and sociology before, which was also a big influence to my work, and also the place I come from. Everybody has been quoting here, Benjamin and everybody, and I thought I also have to do some quoting. So not to disrupt my talk with the quotes, I shoot off my most important quotes for photography in the order of importance to you. The first one is, you can only see what you know. That's about the invisible, and it was by the most famous German, a man called Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. Second quote, a man to some even more famous than Goethe is Walker Evans, who said, "I am interested in what the present will look like as the past." Third one is by a man called Gary Winogrand, which is on one hand very naive, on the other hand a very beautiful and also very complex quote. I photograph to see what the world looks like when I photograph it. So this is why I take pictures, because why I started to take pictures, because I was interested in the image itself. I have a lot of different lives in photography, and I'm only not, tomorrow I guess I talk to some students in the master class, so we can go back to this a bit more, but now it would take too long to go back to what I've been doing before, like having been trained as a photographer for a local newspaper, having worked as a magazine photographer for 10 years, before I actually came back to what I was interested in most, and what I did at when I studied in Essen and at the LCP, doing projects which I could totally control in terms of printing, in terms of color, in terms of publication, and how I handle the work. And this photograph I'm showing here is very, very important for my personal development as a photographer. I wouldn't call it a career. A career is sort of something else. I think as a photographer, as an artist, you develop. You start at some point, and then everything that happens to you, everything that you can think about, matters in the end to what you will become as an artist. And the good news for students is that potentially you all have the individual ability to become a unique artist, simply because your DNA and your experiences are individual. They're not to be copied. It's not, you can't be, oh, what is that? We don't want it. We don't forbid it. Okay. So, in a way, your way of negotiating with the world, with what photography, I think, essentially is, you know, because photography is very close to what is happening in the world, and it's as well as the window to the world, as well as the other thing which I have forgotten. And I think it deals on both levels. So if you find out who you are and why you are interested in things, then you open up a window to become like Paul Seawright. I found this incredibly interesting, how Paul talked about his upbringing in Northern Ireland, of how his work developed, and also aesthetically how he moved from something which was more conscious in terms of the image as an aesthetic structure to a more and more almost documentary, deadpan, it's probably not the right word, approach where the color or the design of the image is not as important anymore. And I see parallels in what I'm doing or what I started to do, and even though my work is very different. Talking about the upbringing, for me it was very, very important because I grew up in a very, very unimportant place. I just show the pictures as I go along. I try to talk about myself, my approach, and also about the project. I will explain about the project in a minute. But the main thing is, like, when I thought about my work, like after being a practitioner for 25 years, what unites my work is really the idea of a sense of belonging. Where do I belong to? What do I long for? That's very, very important, and this is the first piece that, even when it's in India, that deals with it. Because when in '86 I went on a backpacking trip to Asia, and I was already a photographer there. Then I was trained as a newspaper photographer, but I managed, after 9 months in India, to come back with not one image that had any significance and anything to do with me. And this is why I decided actually to study photography, because I knew I could only handle the pattern of photography. I could open a drawer and use something, but I could not actually express what I really meant. So in a way, I went to college to learn the grammar of photography, which I couldn't spell to you, but through my practices, I tried to figure that out. So what now? Okay, I was born, the individual thing was, I was born in Wolfsburg, a very insignificant town. It's only significant because it's a headquarters of the Volkswagen company, and it's a totally artificial town. It used to be, it was founded by Adolf Hitler because he wanted to produce a VW Beetle there, which was actually at that point a propaganda instrument. He wanted the people's car, the Volkswagen, for everybody. So it was a very, very much a propaganda political instrument. And so the city was totally functional. And I grew up in the city. My father was an engineer at Volkswagen. And the only thing is, when you come from a city like this, you leave as fast as you can. And that is a very, very privileged position to be in. Looking at my granddad, he was an economic refugee who was a second son from a farming family in East Prussia, and my granduncle inherited the farm, and my grandfather, second son, had to go to Hitler's, it was called the city of the the KDF wagen, that means power through joy. It's what very awful terminology of the Nazis, and he had to become electricity meter reader for the Nazis, and in order to do so, he had to join the Nazi party. As a result of my granduncle inheriting the farm, was he didn't want to collaborate with the Nazis, and he got shot by them. So history is sometimes very, very strange. But growing up in this insignificant place and having been a displaced second generation, third generation displaced person, I was looking for a home all my life. So, and For some reason, I always liked traveling. A lot of people like traveling, but I like them also the mentality of traveling. It's not like going on holiday. It's not like, as Paul said, seeing significant things. But for me, it's interesting of seeing things I don't understand and try to make sense of it. And now we come to this body of work, which is essentially about India, because India was the country that fascinated me most. And I was very sad on my first trip that I didn't take any significant picture there. Second body of work, this is just an extract from a book which is called XXX Holy, Journeys into the Spiritual Heart of India, which I had photographed. This is the cover of the book from 1996 till 1999. And for me, again, it's about the place. India was charged by something I couldn't really express. I went to places like Varanasi and I felt there was an energy, and I don't mean that I'm not esoteric, and there was an energy which I had never felt before. And for me it was like, how is it when I start to photograph this? How can you photograph a spiritual place without photographing rituals, without doing National Geographic photographs, without doing cliched India type of, I don't know if you know the work of, what's his name, Singh, there's one Singh. No, Raghuveer Singh is a good one, the other one. No, it's Raghu Rai, okay. You know, even there's, it's very, very dense colors and contrast and things like this. And that always felt oppressive to me. And I wanted to do something else, so this set of pictures came about. So with that knowledge I go back, and the places again are very insignificant places, but all in places which have a spiritual meaning in the Indian Hinduist context. And of course there are all sorts of references. Later I discovered that my use of color, especially in this kind of images, is very much based on a man who is very famous in Britain. And I didn't know that. It came to me like 15 years later. It's of course Turner, because when I was studying at the LCP, when I couldn't take pictures because the weather was too bad or I was too frustrated, Tuesday mornings I loved to go to the Tate and look at Turner paintings. But I subconsciously breathed my Turner in, you know. So it's really something. A lot of things, even when you're very clever, which I'm not, but you find out a lot later about your work. And I also the question of home, that is sort of something that came to me really recently, because I was thinking about what does actually connect all these different bodies of work, apart from to like to go away and take pictures. This is again what was David was referring to. It was the body of work which was later called Neon Tigers. And neon is it's a combination of the tiger states. When I was young, we had the tiger states, which are now economic powers like China, Singapore, and things like that. They were referred to as the tiger state, and the neon as you know, a meaning of the light and the glitter, and which is also a term which has been used in popular culture. For me, the neon tiger thing came, I started with just the week after we printed the India book. Because when I finished the India book, I had this kind of, I was actually scared of finishing the book, because then it's like being pregnant, you know, it's like you dealing with something for such a long time, and it lives with you, and then the baby is born, you know. But as you know, it's also fun to have sex again. So in a way, I thought, you know, I have to find something else that occupies my mind and my passion as much as that. And of course, this is a process that doesn't happen after the day after the book is finished. But what happened was that 5 years earlier, the first photographs, I think this was the first photograph I took for this project in Bangkok in 2000, so that's 13 years ago now. What triggered it off was an experience in 1996 when I came back to Bangkok after I hadn't been for a while, and I saw a lot of elevated highways, and I saw people selling downstairs chicken wings sitting on poles which were just 25 cents, and you had an ultra-modern city above. And 2 years earlier I had photographed for a magazine an essay which the science fiction writer William Gibson had written for Wired magazine, and the essay was called Disneyland with a Death Penalty. So I had about 3 days on a magazine assignment, totally crazy, to go to Singapore and illustrate this essay. And this kept in my mind, it was sort of in my mind when I came back to Bangkok 2 years later, because I thought the vision of William Gibson, this is probably illustrates it pretty much. You know, you see the people selling the chicken wings and you see this futuristic world above. So that really triggered this mental note I made saying, you know, one day I have to come back and take photographs of this. So, and coming to my methodology, it's like not so much, a lot of people here, and I find it really interesting how the world differs. You know, a lot of people here have been doing these introductions with maps and the research. For me, the research is visual. For me, it works in the other way around. For me, there is the idea of a subject, which I'm finding interesting, but I can't name. I can't nail it down. For me, it's like, this is a problem with the grammar of photography, because there is something you can't express. This is why we do need these pictures. Or there is something that words can't describe. And there's sort of something on my matrix, I call it on my matrix, and there's something out there. And for me, the exercise is when I start a project to take this inner pictures on my matrix to the place where I think this picture can happen, and then I work for a week and try to come up with one picture that matches the idea on my inner matrix. When that happens, when I manage to do that, then I think, yes, I can make a project of that. And when I start the project, then I do the research, then I read about the megacities, then I get my coal house, then I read the essays and things like that, and then I do the research, where can I go? But the approach is always very, very visual. And I was also find it very interesting when Paul said he went to like 13 offices, recruiting offices, and couldn't take a single picture because was not interesting enough. So there must be also, doesn't matter how political the work is, a certain amount of aesthetic criteria that triggers us as photographic practitioners to you know, press a button and then in the end also edit the picture in. And for example, what's also very interesting is I went to one city, Jakarta, where I photographed for 2 weeks and I didn't include a single picture in the book, because it was simply not good enough. I either had better images or it was not there. And funny enough, almost 10 years later, last year, I published a book called The Raw and the Cooked, where which also deals with pictures, and there Jakarta is on the cover, and I have included a lot of pictures of Jakarta. First of all, the project had a different focal point, and maybe I was a better photographer, and the city has developed in the last 6 years as well. interesting is also the sense of the past in the pictures. To you, they might look futuristic. In 2010, I showed them in an exhibition in Shanghai, and everybody thought they're historic photographs. For example, this is, you couldn't take this picture again because the trees have been grown so high that the bridge is now hidden, which would also make an interesting picture. But even though it's very slow photography, it's also done with a 4x5" camera and color sheet film. It is, in a way, unique. Also, at that point, at that time, only that image can happen. This is also historic. I mean, it looks so futuristic, and I mean, in my lifetime, when I was traveling, sort of in my lifetime above 20, I've seen this crossing, and when I first came to Shanghai in 1987 as a backpacker, this street was an open street, it was full of bicycles, and it had one lane for cars. When I came back a couple of years later, in 93, I think it was like one lane for bicycles and 3 lanes for cars. And then when I came back in 2000, they had turned it into a pedestrian zone. They created this bridge, and if you go to Shanghai now, they have an underpass and the bridge is gone. So things that have taken Europe to do like 100 years, the Chinese are repeating in 5, basically, or 10, which is now on the cover of every newspaper as well. Aesthetically, of course, there are lots of traps you could fall into, and a lot of these city pictures, especially the night shots, I mean, you must not forget they're basically 10, 11, 12 years old, now became photographic stereotypes and being repeated by a lot of people. Anyway, that was the cover of the book, and I was very lucky because I won tons of awards with it for the book, for the piece, and even though I was not aiming so much, I came from a magazine background and I had some contacts, so a lot of magazines published the story, but it was also shown in exhibitions and also in galleries, and so that really helped to finish off the next book I did, which was something completely different. It was about the country I come from. And again, it's a very personal project. I always felt like, is there a possibility to photograph the German landscape, which is very much charged? We have a word in Germany, it's called Heimat. It means something like homeland, but again, it has been very much misused by the Nazis, and it has been sort of really ideologized in a way that was just totally uncool to talk about Heimat. And I'm always a bit of a difficult person. I like to do the opposite, you know, while a lot of people did documentary work where Germany is sort of ugly and all that. So I thought, how do you do that if I do something which is essentially beautiful on the surface and on the other hand sort of raises a lot of questions on how we look aesthetically at Germany at the moment, how this is rooted in the history of painting, and also then I discovered while I went along that the whole idea of the paintings of the 18th and the 19th century, of the Flemish painting, but also Caspar David Friedrich, all this development of the basically pre-modernist area, dealt also with a record of daily life. People were basically essentially working in these paintings. They were doing, you know, looking for their daily needs. While if you now go into the contemporary landscape, it's always, always, always a leisure landscape. You don't see anybody physically working in the landscape. It's an exception. So, and everybody wears a red Gore-Tex jacket. And this was very, very difficult. It looks very easy, but it was very, very difficult to do because to have the right light, to have the right space. None of these photographs are staged. They're all found photographs. They're all shot with a tripod 4x5 inch. So I had to kind of assume that something might happen. So a lot of the time I drove around Germany and spent like 4 or 5 days without taking a single photograph. Sometimes I took a picture because I was frustrated. I needed to do something. But, you know, and then, you know, after like maybe for this picture, I waited about 4 hours that the light was right and the guy was sort of right and standing in the, standing up, that I had this idea of people. So, and I wouldn't, and so the things are interrelated because the book Neon Tigers was a big success. They did a second print run and sold about 7,000 or 8,000 copies. So, and my publisher liked the idea of this project. So they've been really pushy and say, you know, Neon Tigers was published in 2004, and I started with this project in 2002 already. So they were really pushing me and saying, you have to go out. We want to make a book of that. You know, it's a very privileged situation to be in. And I finished the book with the help and through that pressure, because sometimes it was very, very frustrating to spend all this time without taking a picture. In the city, it's more interesting. The food is more interesting. The people are more interesting. You know, it's like the light, and it's sort of more exotic. So it feels nicer to fail when you're abroad. You know? It's more difficult to fail at home. You know, it's like you know that from your parents. You know? Anyway, and that became the cover, and that's of course an icon which everybody called the Bruegel. And this was my reference. I was so glad when I found it, to that famous painting of Caspar David Friedrichs, The Monk by the Sea, which is supposed to be the first modern painting. And I'm sure if you don't know it, David will show it to you on the internet the next day. Anyway, that was the book. Next thing is something Paul has done as well in a different way, but the book about the transitional space, and it started with a very, very naive idea. The college, how am I for time? The thing is, this talk will just fade. You know, I will just go as far as I come, and then it will fade out. Like it's like the 70s record, you know, the sweep, where the record fades out. So this is what I will be doing. Okay. And this is owed to, you know, David said, I studied in Essen, and while I was studying in Essen, I never photographed the changes of this coal mining area in the Ruhr Valley, which I could sort of, I'm still very angry with myself, but I had other things to do. I had to travel, go to England and things like that. When my college moved to this area, this is an old harbor area in the port of Bremen. So we're in an old warehouse, which sounds very romantic, but has its problems. I thought, while I'm there, I start to photograph the transition of the space. Now there are lots of hip restaurants and lofts and things like that. So I started to do this. It was kind of an exercise that and I also wanted to use the idea of the sublime from my Heimat images, combined with the light from the Neon Tigers in a sort of very, very quiet place. Then I realized in my own hometown, Hamburg, where I lived for 20 years, the same thing is going on, a huge transformation of the harbor area. It's still the biggest transformation project in Europe. This is from Hamburg. This is also from Hamburg. This is again from Bremen. So I started basically in the towns where I went to, but when I talked to people about this project, I had to give a talk in India, And then the director of the Goethe Institute told me about this place, Gurgaon in India, where lots of change is going on. And I realized wherever I went, something like this was going on. And I thought, you know, then I'm being sort of local worldwide. And in the end, I ended up in photographing in 26 different cities in 14 countries on 4 continents. Sometimes on purpose that I traveled, sometimes just when I went somewhere for a talk, I took my large format camera, and sometimes just went for a day to one area and shot about 20 frames, and if I was lucky, 1 frame was included. In the end, I decided, even when I told you now where the pictures were, in the end I decided to name the cities, to name the countries, to name the continents, but the pictures are just called transition 1 to 52, so I'm not telling you where the individual picture is. Because for me it became totally unimportant, because it's a phenomena I'm creating, or also I'm creating a fictional narrative in the book that goes from the known, the old industrial areas, to the unknown, where you will see in the end the last picture becomes a total abstract. I could have also called the project Anywhere, which would have been too simple. But you know, you wouldn't, if you would write down where you think this is, you know, you wouldn't go get it all wrong. You know, could be around the corner, where it could be also in Argentina. So, and this is the last picture of the book. And again, for me, it's nice because it's also like just half a kilometer away from where I took the first picture, and I took this picture the week after I took the first picture, and in between I take you on a journey around the world. And that is also a strong point, a strong visual argument for that documentary photography is fiction, because it's what you make of it. So I make this book, I make this point about the world. And I think it's also important when there's a lot of debate going on about what happens in photography, everything has been photographed. Yes, it has, but not by you, not with a special perspective. So if you have a certain kind of way of looking at the things, you have to find out what triggers you, and then it might become something valid and individual. And that requires, of course, a lot of knowledge and a lot of commitment. Next project is like, again, totally triggered by the visual. Everywhere I went, even when I finished Neon Tigers, when I was in big cities, I couldn't stop my fascination with big cities. I was still taking pictures, God knows why, with a large format camera. And I'm very Protestant. I have a Protestant work ethic. So if I have a free evening and I'm in an interesting place, I just have to take pictures. So it's really... and I went to this roof of this car park, and it's not, I hate anecdotes, but this is very important. I couldn't take the picture I thought I could do, but next to me I saw this green wall out of trees, which is now, because it's blown away, not a green wall anymore, but it's a very, very photographic abstract. And I was thinking already while I was standing there that this is very strange, because if you think of humankind, how many times do we have humans on the planet? Is that 20 million years or something like that? Does anybody have the exact figure? Can anybody Google it? Anyway, like we can agree on the millions of years, mankind, women included, can only look at nature in one way. The sun comes from above, you have one light source, and then you have something like nature. But for the last 10 years, I mean 10 years before I took these pictures, suddenly some cities have become so bright that the light gives you a possibility of perception you could have never had before. That's something I would find very, very interesting. I thought about this when I took the pictures, I thought about this when I meditated about the picture, and a year later I happened to be in this place, in Singapore, again for a talk with the Goethe Institute, and I was driving underneath that bridge, and I had to go back the next day before I flew out and take a picture there. And the pictures share exactly the same phenomena. And the light is totally surreal because it comes from car headlights, it comes from this light and that light and building sites and things like that. And so I figured out that if we take the idea of climate change serious, that we will not be able to see that for a long time, because we would need to focus our light sources with LED, with intelligent lighting, that we're not wasting just so much energy. So I thought at a moment in time, it's the only possibility to take these photographs, maybe from like 1998 till maybe for the next 10 years, and then it'll be over. And over the research I've done while I did the project, I found out that Nicholas Stern, who was at some point the chief economist of the World Bank, was saying in an environmental report in 2000-something, sorry, I'm not that academic, that if we take climate change seriously, we have to switch off the lights in our cities. So he gave the argument for what I felt sort of unconsciously already when I looked at that with a certain type of general knowledge. While I was doing it, I shot it with a large format camera over a 6-month research stay in Asia, which was funded by the Goethe Institute and my university. I did not process the films. I did only one take. I didn't do 2 exposures, and I didn't know what will come out of it. For me, I was that strange figure that was this Westerner, sweating, pointing his camera at some bush. People were like commuting, they came from work, it was dark, and they saw this figure with a black cloth pointing the camera at a bush, And I enjoyed the possibilities of getting deeper into abstracts. And there's some pictures which I sort of rediscovered in some museums, and the guy who painted them was called Monet. Subconsciously, you adapt everything you have in your culture and put it in your pictures. So there are lots of ways of abstractions and energy and things like that. So again, it goes far beyond the documentary, but in terms of context, it's again very, very important and has a lot of relevance. I think in terms of what I would like to do, I mean, if I'd be a real great photographer, I would just do projects like this, because I think it's the best combination, something of real significance with something that is also beautiful, edgy, and aesthetically very, very seductive. So for me, the idea of seductiveness, that's something that is important, because I always loved pictures. Having said this, I'm sort of doing the opposite at the moment. I'm doing a project about Germany. It's probably called the Second Heimat, and it will be very, very different. It's not aesthetically seductive. But anyway, mentally we're still in 2008, 2009. Okay, that was that. And the book was called Paradise Now. This is a project that became a project through contemporary events. And I'm not making this up. I was in the Philippines, and also I couldn't photograph for the Paradise Now project, but I had a sort of residency there because in the Philippines there's hardly any green in the city left. And I was photographing city structures for the project, which I hopefully can show some pictures of last. And one of my guides, a young woman who's been in one of my workshops, took me to this place. And this place is a very, very interesting place because it's the first stop for migrants who come from the countryside to the city. And they build their homes out of scrap and what the sea washes ashore and what they can buy from their neighbors. And they and the place is situated on the beach. It's like between two container terminals. It's white sand, and it's kind of something like what's this place in California where all these film stars live? You know,
Venice Beach.
Yeah, I know Venice Beach, Malibu, and it's kind of a vernacular Malibu. It's really amazing. I was totally blown away by the creativity of these structures, and nevertheless, most of the pictures you see here are taken with an amateur camera, with my research camera, and I went back and did a couple of pictures, also with a large format camera. But the way it turned into a book, apart from being visual research, was the simple fact that while I was editing my digital pictures from my half-year stay in Asia, it was the same time when the Lehman Brothers bank collapsed. Then everybody was talking about the 30s and about the economic crisis and depression and things like this. And of course, at the same time I was looking at these pictures and I was thinking, of course, of Walker Evans, and I was thinking of, hang on, these people have been in crisis before there was a crisis for the European and American middle classes. So I had made a decision that I had to do something with the pictures, and I corrected the lines and I worked on the files and things like this and showed it to my American gallery at the same time as to my publisher at Paris Photo a couple of years back, and we decided to do an installation in the gallery and also do a small book with no clever text by any writer, just with my words about what I felt for these people. And it's really about the dignity, about the longing to make a home for yourself with not having anything, with not having any materials. And having heard about the floods in the Philippines, you know, you would know that these huts, which are sitting right on the beach, they all don't exist anymore. There have been like minor floods, and they're washed ashore if you have like just a minor storm. And as a consequence of that, when I was invited to South Africa for residency, I didn't have to think about a project for a long time, because I thought I wanted to know what these places look like from the inside. So I went to a place in Soweto, was called Kliptown, which again, can't tell you now because it has also strong political meaning within the ANC. This is where Nelson Mandela and Walter Sisulu created the Freedom Charter, which is now the basis for the South African Constitution. And the sad story about it is that even with the ANC in power for the last 20-something years, for the people of Kliptown, who basically live in the slum, nothing has changed. Some people have been living in these huts for 40 years, and they're very, very bitter about the ANC. Okay, and this is what I wanted to use that picture for. I did a book, the latest book which was published is called The Raw and the Cooked. I have till 3 o'clock, right?
Yeah.
Okay. We manage. It's only another 50 pictures, but I'll be fast. I think it's going to be a minute. So anyway, so this became the first picture of this book, which is called The Raw and the Cooked. You see the raw here. Of course, a term was taken from Claude Lévi-Strauss, French anthropologist, and it paraphrases the idea of the very simple idea of making a home for yourself to the very sophisticated way. I also, like Paul does, I never take any sort of position. I think photography as propaganda, whether it's for BMW or for the environment, is boring, because I want to create something where you can make up your own mind and then sort of, you know, see what you take out of this. And the readings of these photographs is so different that it's really depending what you want to see, you can see in them. This is, for me, incredible to see a 4-story slum, because I thought this is like from Gangs of New York. I mean, if you know the film with Leonardo DiCaprio, it's exactly the same settings, you know. So only 120 years back, when we had the pictures from Jacob Riis from the slums of New York, they looked like that. So anyway, and through the development of the book, it gets more and more sophisticated, and this is what became the cover image. This is a picture of Jakarta, and unlike the neon tigers, where the atmosphere and the light and the futuristic aspect was more important, this is much more 19th century photography, triggered by the idea when I was standing on these roofs, on these car parks. That was in most of the pictures were 2007, 2008, but some are also older and some are also newer. I was thinking that I might be the last person who stands here with a 4x5-inch camera to record this. So in a way, it's very, very 19th century. It's a classical photography that the French explorers used, who went with a foreign ministry, but of course with the aspect, again, of transition and change. For me, this is one of the, if I had to sort of build a picture or paint the picture or draw a picture, I think you couldn't do it better than in this picture. It's absolutely, totally perfect in terms of the house, which is still lived in, the part with a motorcycle, the palm tree, and the shopping mall next to it, and then again this little telegraph pole, which we of course have all borrowed, like what you've seen from Paul's rewrite by from Stephen Shaw and the American photography. You know, since then photography is in love with poles. Which is good. I mean, you have to be aware of this, you know, because these are also dangers. You know, you need to have visual structures, but if you just work out of your visual drawer, you know, you never find your own kind of subject within it. This is one of the rare opportunities where you can. This is the same house I shot from that side, and again, the story behind it, it's quite interesting because it's like a beautiful house, and the people are not forced out of their house in terms of you have to go and you have to sell and by any sort of evil powers. They were just forced out by the wind and the noise. They lived in that house for 40 years, and accidentally I've been there the day they had to vacate the house, and the mother was crying, and the son just told me it's impossible to live there because of the winds that have been created through the canyons of buildings. They could have stayed there. It's really, but people sort of subsequently left their homes. And another thing, you know, if you're interested in that, that's in India, in Calcutta, and these little huts there is not what have been there before. They're there because of the modern development. And this is, again, you can only see what you know is because these people from what they call the informal sector, they come to support the people from the middle classes who live in high-rise apartment buildings by providing service industries for very little money. So it's almost a symbiotic relationship, which is a big subject of discussion at the moment in city developments about clearing of slums and things like that, because people have recently discovered that the modern city infrastructure needs the so-called informal settlements. Otherwise, the whole city would be dysfunctional, because people wouldn't, on one hand, wouldn't have the service. On the other hand, people who provide the service would be out of work. We're not discussing the amount of money they're earning with it and things like that. It's just like the idea of it. So we just flick through that, and you see it becomes more and more dense, and yes, I've got 2 minutes left. I want to just show you the last picture. And this is the last picture. You remember the first picture, and this is what I had to say to you. Thank you very much for listening.